I drove 300 miles to Harbor Point because my father claimed the business was bleeding cash and he needed a strategist. I expected a war room. Instead, I stood in the back of a crowded town hall while my brother, Grant, adjusted his silk tie and announced he was the new partner. My father didn't look at me once. In that heavy silence, I realized I hadn't been called home to lead. I had been summoned to serve. The rain in Harbor Point did not wash things clean. It just made everything heavier. It soaked into the gray concrete of the shipping yards, slicked the iron rails of the loading docks, and turned the sky into a relentless, bruising shade of slate. I drove my rental sedan through the familiar gates of Hasten Freight Group, the windshield wipers slapping a frantic rhythm that matched the pulse in my throat. I had not been back here in 4 years, not since I left to build a life in Portland where my last name did not automatically come with a preconceived notion of who I was and what I was capable of. I was 33 years old. I was a senior operations strategist for a logistics firm that handled 3 times the volume of my father's company. I had a reputation for turning bleeding balance sheets into fortresses of profitability. Yet, as I parked in the visitor lot, because there was no reserved spot for me, I felt that old, suffocating weight settling over my shoulders. My father, Leonard Hayes, had called me 3 days ago. His voice had been tight, clipped, the sound of a man who was used to giving orders but was currently afraid of the silence on the other end of the line. He told me the lenders were coming for a comprehensive review. He told me the company needed modernizing. He used the word urgent twice. He asked me to come home. I thought I was coming back as a savior. I thought I was coming back as a consultant, a professional equal who happened to be family. I grabbed my briefcase, locked the car, and walked toward the main entrance. The security guard, a man named Miller who had given me peppermint candies when I was 6, looked at my ID badge, hesitated for a second too long, and then buzzed me in without making eye contact. That was the first sign, though I chose to ignore it. I walked through the lobby, noting the peeling paint on the crown molding and the way the reception desk seemed cluttered with paper invoices rather than digital scanners. It smelled like old coffee and damp wool, the scent of a company that had stopped moving forward somewhere around 2010. I went straight to my father's office, but his assistant, a new woman I did not recognize, told me he was already down on the floor for the town hall meeting. "Oh," she said, "you did not know? Everyone is gathering in Bay 4. No one had told me." I checked my watch. It was 9 in the morning. I smoothed the front of my blazer, swallowed the irritation rising in my chest, and headed for the warehouse. Bay 4 was a cavernous space, echoing with the low murmur of 200 employees. Drivers, loaders, dispatchers, and admin staff stood in loose clusters. I saw faces I recognized, men and women who had worked for my father for 20 years. I saw new faces, younger, looking anxious. There was a makeshift stage set up near the foreman's office, a wooden platform draped in blue cloth with the company logo pinned crookedly to the front. I stayed in the back, standing near a stack of pallets. I wanted to assess the room before I made my presence known. I wanted to see my father. Leonard Hayes stood on the stage, looking older than I remembered. His hair was completely white now, and his suit hung a little loose on his frame, as if he had shrunk inside it. But he was smiling. Beside him stood my brother, Grant. My younger brother looked nothing like the struggling manager I had heard rumors about. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most of the people in this room made in a month. It was Italian cut, navy blue, sharp enough to cut glass. He stood with his legs apart, hands clasped behind his back, projecting an image of supreme confidence. He scanned the crowd, and for a second, his eyes landed on me in the back. He did not wave, he did not nod. He just smirked, a tiny tightening of the corner of his mouth, and then looked away. My father tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the room, silencing the murmurs. "Good morning, everyone," my father said. His voice was warm, the voice of the man who had built this place from a single truck. "I know there have been rumors about changes, I know people are worried about the economy and the new contracts. That is why I wanted to bring you all here today, to talk about the future. I stepped forward slightly, ready to be called up. I assumed this was the moment. He would introduce me. He would tell them that Vivian Hayes was back to help steer the ship, to bring the rigorous efficiency I was known for in Portland to the family legacy. I had a speech prepared in my head. I had bullet points about stability, workflow optimization, and employee retention. My father put a hand on Grant's shoulder. "The future of Hazen Freight is secure," my father said, "and it is time to acknowledge the leadership that will take us there. I am proud to announce that as of this morning, Grant is officially a full partner in the firm." The air left my lungs. It was a physical blow, sudden and sharp. Grant stepped up to the mic. He did not look surprised. He looked like he had been rehearsing this moment in the mirror for weeks. "Thank you, Dad," Grant said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "We are going to shake things up. We are going to trim the fat. We are going to make this company lean and aggressive. I am the new partner, but I am also the guy who is going to make sure we win." There was a scattering of applause. It was not enthusiastic. It was the polite, terrified applause of people who knew their mortgages depended on the man holding the microphone. "And," Grant added, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the room, almost as an afterthought, "we have got Vivian back for a few weeks to help out with some paperwork before the bank review. So if you see her around, say hello. She is pitching in to support the team." Support the team. He had reduced me to a temp, in 2 sentences. He had taken my decade of high-level experience, my portfolio of successful turnarounds, and my title, and he had fed them into a shredder. He had framed me as the big sister coming home to file papers while the men did the real work. My father smiled and nodded, looking out at the crowd. He let the room assume I was merely support staff. He let the lie stand. I felt the heat climb up my neck. I looked around. The shift supervisors, men who had bounced me on their knees when I was a toddler, were looking at their boots. The payroll clerks were whispering behind their hands. No one looked me in the eye. They knew. In the unspoken language of corporate hierarchy, a signal had been flared into the sky. Grant is the power, Vivian is the help. I turned and walked out of the warehouse before the meeting ended. I did not want them to see me shaking. The rest of the day was a study in humiliation. I was given a temporary desk in a windowless office that used to be a storage closet. It still smelled like toner cartridges. I did not have a computer login. I had to ask the IT manager, a nervous man named Owen Pike, to set me up. He wouldn't look at me while he typed in the temporary password. "Welcome back. Miss Hayes," he said, staring at the keyboard. "Thanks." "Owen," I said, "just Vivian is fine." He didn't reply. He just finished the setup and practically ran out of the room. I started trying to access the operational data I needed for the review my father had allegedly brought me here for. I needed load manifests, fuel cost averages, and driver overtime logs. I called the head of dispatch, voicemail. I called the vendor relations manager, voicemail. At 2 p.m, I walked down to the break room to get coffee. 2 women from payroll were standing by the sink. They stopped talking the second I walked in. The silence was thick, heavy with pity and speculation. "I heard you used to work in Portland." One of them said, "She was young, maybe 22. "I still do," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm just consulting here." "Oh," she said, "that is nice of you. To help your brother out." I gripped my coffee mug so hard I thought the ceramic might snap. To help my brother out. That was the narrative. Grant was the visionary. I was the assistant. I went back to my closet of an office. I tried to call a key vendor, a fuel supplier I knew personally from my work in the region. His assistant picked up. "Oh, Vivian," she said, "I am so sorry, but all calls regarding Hazen Freight are being routed directly to Grant's office now. It is a new directive." "Since when?" I asked. "Since this morning," she said. I hung up. I sat there in the windowless room, listening to the hum of the ventilation system. I felt like a ghost in my own history. I had come here to save the company, and instead, I had been quarantined. That evening, I was expected at my parents' house for dinner. It was a mandatory command performance. The house was a sprawling Victorian on the hill overlooking the harbor, the house I had grown up in. It was filled with heavy oak furniture and silence. Dinner was roast chicken and tension. We sat in the formal dining room. My father sat at the head of the table. Grant to his right, me to his left, my mother, Elaine, sat at the other end. "So," Grant said, cutting into his chicken with aggressive precision, "how was your first day back in the minor leagues?" I ignored the jab. "The data is a mess." "Grant, I tried to pull the last quarter's logistics reports, but half the files are restricted. If you want me to prep for the lender review, I need access." Grant laughed. He took a sip of red wine. "You worry too much. Viv, that is your problem. You are always looking at the weeds. I am handling the big picture. The lenders just want to see growth potential. Lenders want to see solvency." I said, "They want to see debt-to-income ratios that do not look like a heart attack." Leonard cleared his throat. Now, he said. "Let's not talk shop at the table." I put my fork down. "You called me here to talk shop." "Dad, you told me it was urgent. I just wanted the family together," Leonard said. But his eyes shifted away from mine. "And I thought you could use a break from the city." "A break?" I looked at him. "I am not on vacation." "I have a career," Grant snorted. "A career. You are a glorified calculator. Vivian, you push numbers around for strangers. Here, we are building a legacy. I am building a legacy." I looked at my mother. She was pushing peas around her plate. She had always been the peacekeeper, which in our family meant she was the one who told me to be quiet so the men would not get upset. Elaine looked up and gave me a tight, polite smile. "It is just nice to have you home. Vivian, even if it is just for a little while, maybe you can help Grant organize his calendar. He is going to be so busy with the partnership. The insult was wrapped in so much cotton wool it took a second to feel the sting. Help him organize his calendar. Like I was a secretary. Like I had not negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts 3 months ago. I am not here to be his secretary." "Mom," I said quietly. Elaine sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "You always have to be so difficult. Dear, why can't you just be happy for your brother? He has worked so hard." I looked at Grant. He was grinning. It was the same grin he used to have when we were kids, and he would break one of my toys, knowing he would never be punished for it. "I walked away years ago," Grant said, leaning back in his chair. "That is what you did, right? You left. You thought you were too good for this place. So do not come back now and act like you own the joint. You forfeited your seat at the table. Viv, you are a guest." I looked at my father, waiting for him to correct him, waiting for him to say, "She is my daughter, and she is the best strategist we have." Leonard took a sip of his wine. "Pass the salt, please, Elaine." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I finished my dinner without saying another word. I felt a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something else. The next morning, I bypassed my office and went straight to the compliance department. It was tucked away in the basement, a forgotten corner of the building. Nora Bell was the director there. She had been with the company since I was in high school. She was a stern woman with glasses on a chain and a reputation for having zero sense of humor. I liked her. She was staring at her monitor when I knocked on the doorframe. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw genuine relief in her eyes. "Vivian," she said, "I heard you were back." "Hi." "Nora," I said. I shut the door behind me. "Can we talk? Off the record?" She hesitated. She glanced at the ceiling, as if checking for microphones. She motioned for me to sit. "I need the real numbers." "Nora," I said, "Grant is stonewalling me. The data on the server is fragmented. What is going on?" Nora took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "It is not just fragmented. Vivian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is altered." "What do you mean?" "I mean the board packets that Grant presents to the directors. They do not match the internal data summaries I generate. I send up the reports on Tuesday. By the time they get to the board meeting on Friday, the expenses are down 20% and the projected revenue is up 15%. That is fraud. Nora, I said. She nodded grimly. I know. I tried to bring it up to Leonard last month. He told me I was reading the spreadsheets wrong. He told me Grant has a new accounting method. I felt a chill go down my spine. A new accounting method. That was corporate speak for cooking the books. Is there anything else? I asked. Nora hesitated again. Then she typed something into her keyboard and turned the monitor toward me. Look at the vendor list, she said. I leaned in. I scanned the rows of data. It looked standard at first. Fuel, maintenance, insurance. Then I saw it. Strategic consulting expenses. There were dozens of entries. Monthly payments of $5,000, $7,000, $10,000. They were paid out to companies I had never heard of. North Star Solutions, Apex Advisory Group, Blue Horizon Strategies. Who are these? I asked. I do not know. Nora said. I asked for the service contracts to verify the invoices. Grant told me they were confidential executive advisors. But look at the invoices. She clicked open a folder. She pulled up 3 PDF invoices from 3 different companies. North Star Solutions, Apex Advisory Group, Blue Horizon Strategies. They had different logos. Terrible clip art graphics. But the font was identical. The layout was identical. And the description of services was exactly the same on every single one. Strategic oversight and market analysis for Q3. They are the same person. I said. Nora nodded. And they are draining about $40,000 a month out of the operating budget. I sat back in the chair. $40,000 a month, almost $500,000 a year. In a company this size, that was the difference between profit and loss. That was the difference between giving the drivers a Christmas bonus and laying them off. Can you print these? I asked. Nora looked terrified. If Grant finds out? He won't. I promised. I will protect you. Nora. But I need the proof. She printed them. I folded the pages and tucked them into the inside pocket of my blazer, right against my heart. I walked upstairs to the executive suite. My heart was hammering, but my face was stone. I walked past the admin, ignoring her protests, and pushed open the door to Grant's office. He was putting a golf ball into a glass cup on the carpet. He looked up, annoyed. Knock much? He asked. I walked over to his desk and slammed the invoices down on the mahogany. Who is North Star Solutions? Grant? I asked. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the papers. He just leaned on his putter and sighed. I told you. Vivian, strategic partners. They are fake, I said. Identical invoices, generic names, $40,000 a month going into a black hole. Where is the money going? He laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. You come back here for 2 days and you think you are Sherlock Holmes? You wouldn't understand partnership-level strategy. Viv, sometimes you have to move capital around to optimize tax liabilities. It is over your head. It is embezzlement, I said. Grant's face changed. The smirk vanished. He took a step toward me. He was taller than me, broad-shouldered. He used that size now, moving into my personal space. Watch your mouth, he said softly. You are a guest here. You are here because Dad felt sorry for you. Do not make me regret letting you in the building. You are stealing from the company. Grant, you are stealing from Dad. Dad knows what he needs to know, Grant said, and he knows I am the one keeping this place alive. You want to run to him with your little papers? Go ahead. See who he believes. The son who stayed and ran the business, or the daughter who abandoned him and only came back to complain? He leaned in closer. His breath smelled of mint and coffee. Don't embarrass the family. Vivian, go back to your little office. Check the typos in the employee handbook and collect your consulting fee. Leave the real business to the men. I stared at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap him, but I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He truly believed he was untouchable. He believed that our Father's love was a shield that would protect him from any law, any math, any truth. I picked up the invoices. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out. I drove back to the small rental apartment I was staying in. It was dark now. The rain had started again. I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine and the stolen invoices spread out in front of me. I thought about packing my bags. I could leave tonight. I could drive back to Portland, go back to my glass-walled office, back to a world where logic mattered, where facts were respected. I didn't need this. I didn't need the abuse. I didn't need to be the unwanted daughter begging for scraps of respect. But then I looked at the numbers again. $40,000 a month. I thought about the town hall. I thought about the drivers in their worn-out jackets. I thought about the receptionist with the frayed cuffs. They were working double shifts, missing their kids' soccer games, ruining their backs on the loading docks, all to keep this company afloat. And Grant was siphoning their sweat equity into shell accounts to fund his Italian suits and his ego. And Leonard, my father, he knew. Or he refused to know. Nora had said she tried to tell him. He had chosen blindness. He had chosen the lie because the lie was easier than admitting his golden boy was a thief. It wasn't just ego. It wasn't just a squabble between siblings. It was systemic deception. It was a rot eating the company alive from the inside out. If I left, the company would collapse. The lenders would find this eventually. They always did. And when they did, they would liquidate everything. The employees would lose their pensions. The legacy my grandfather started would be sold for scrap. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was dark and bitter. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I was done trying to be the good daughter. I was done trying to be the helpful sister. I pulled my laptop toward me. I opened a new encrypted file. I named it Project Cleanup. I would stay. I would smile at Grant in the hallways. I would nod at my father's dinner table. I would be the quiet, cooperative, insignificant temp they wanted me to be. And while they were looking the other way, I was going to document every single discrepancy. I was going to map every dollar. I was going to find out who was pressured into silence and who was complicit in the crime. I was not here to save the family anymore. I was here to save the truth. I typed the first entry into the log. Date, November 3rd. Subject, strategic consulting fraud. Evidence, 3 invoices. Witness, Nora Bell. I hit save. The screen glowed in the dark kitchen. A single square of light in the shadows. My brother had said I was a guest. He was wrong. I was the landlord, and I was just starting the inspection. The conspiracy began in the break room, over a pot of coffee that tasted like burnt hazelnuts and despair. I knew I could not dismantle the fortress Grant had built alone. He controlled the narrative, the board access, and the father. If I was going to expose the rot in the foundation, I needed people who knew where the termites were burying themselves. I needed a network, small, silent, and invisible. I started with Owen Pike. Owen was 26, the head of IT security, and he walked through the hallways with his shoulders hunched, as if he expected to be struck by lightning at any moment. I cornered him on a Tuesday morning while he was fixing the wireless router in the West Wing. "Owen," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "I need to talk to you about the server logs." He dropped his screwdriver. "Vivian, I really cannot. Grant said all admin requests go through him." I closed the door. "I am not asking for admin requests. Owen, I am asking if you have noticed the traffic spikes on the secure drive at 2 a.m. I am asking if you are comfortable with the fact that your credentials are being used to authorize deletions you did not make." Owen went pale. He looked at the closed door, then back at me. "How did you know about that?" "Because I know how my brother works." I said, "He is lazy." "Owen, he uses the master key for everything because he cannot be bothered to learn the individual codes. If the audit comes, and it will, the investigators are going to see your login ID wiping financial records. Grant will not take the fall. He will say you went rogue." Owen stared at me, his eyes wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He wiped his palms on his jeans. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing." I said, "Do not stop him. Do not block him. Just mirror the drive. Create a shadow copy of everything he touches and store it on an encrypted partition that only you and I can access. Can you do that? He swallowed hard. Then he nodded. Yes, I can do that. Good. I said, you are not just the IT guy anymore. Owen, you are the insurance policy. Next was Marisol Kent. She was the director of procurement, a woman who could negotiate a 10% discount on diesel fuel with a single raised eyebrow. I invited her to lunch at a diner 3 towns over, far enough away that no one from Hasten Freight would see us. She sat across from me, picking at a Cobb salad. She looked angry. She had the tight jaw of someone who had been swallowing insults for a living. I know why you are here. Vivian, she said, you want to know about the vendors. I want to know why we are 3 months behind on payments to the local mechanics. I said, I want to know why we are switching to suppliers who charge 20% more for inferior tires. Marisol let out a short, bitter laugh. Because the new suppliers offer kickbacks. Vivian, they call them volume rebates. But the money does not go back into the operating account. It goes into a discretionary fund that Grant controls. Can you prove it? I asked. I have the emails. She said, I have the original quotes and the inflated contracts Grant forced me to sign. I have kept copies of everything in a box in my garage because I knew, eventually, someone would ask why our operating costs effectively doubled overnight. I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. We are going to fix it. Marisol, but I need you to hold the line. Keep the copies safe, and when I ask for them, be ready. She looked at me, searching my face for the weakness she saw in my father. Are you staying, Vivian? Or are you going to run back to Portland when it gets ugly? I am staying, I said, until the house is clean, with Nora, Owen, and Marisol. I had the beginning of a nervous system. We did not meet in groups. We did not send emails. We spoke in quiet corners, in the parking lot after hours, in code. 3 days later, Owen delivered the first smoking gun. He came to my makeshift office late in the afternoon, looking more terrified than usual. He placed a thumb drive on my desk and backed away. You need to see the dashboards, he whispered. What dashboards? The ones he shows to Falcon Ridge. Owen said, Falcon Ridge Holdings was the private equity firm that held our primary debt covenants. If we breached certain financial ratios, debt to equity, liquidity, cash flow coverage, they had the right to call the loans, which would bankrupt us instantly. I plugged the drive into my laptop. I pulled up the file Owen had flagged. On the left side of my screen, I opened the real internal financial data that Nora and I had pieced together. It showed a company hemorrhaging cash. Revenue was flat, but expenses were sky-high due to the consulting fees and vendor inflation. Our cash flow coverage ratio was 0.8. Anything below 1.0 meant we were technically insolvent. On the right side of the screen, I opened the dashboard Grant had presented to the Falcon Ridge board last week. It was a work of fiction. The revenue numbers were identical, but the expenses had been surgically altered. The consulting fees were categorized as capital investments, which removed them from the operating expense calculation. The vendor debts were pushed into the next quarter. The cash flow coverage ratio on Grant's dashboard was a healthy 1.4. He wasn't just lying to our father, he was lying to the bank. This was not just mismanagement, this was bank fraud. This was the kind of thing that people went to federal prison for. I stared at the screen, watching the cursor blink. If I exposed this now, the lenders would foreclose, the company would die. I had to find a way to remove the cancer without killing the patient. I needed leverage. I needed a weapon that was internal, not external. I spent the next 2 nights in the basement archive room. It was a dusty, windowless vault, filled with metal filing cabinets that smelled of mildew and time. I was looking for the corporate bylaws, the original ones. Written when my grandfather incorporated the business in 1974, most companies updated their bylaws every decade, but Hasten Freight was a creature of habit. My father hated legal paperwork. He operated on handshakes and tradition. I was banking on the hope that no one had bothered to modernize the governance rules. I found them in a cracked leather binder on the bottom shelf of a cabinet labeled Corporate Formation. The pages were yellowed, typed on a typewriter that had a sticky E key. I read through the articles of incorporation, duties of the president, duties of the secretary, shareholder rights. I stopped at Article 9, Section 4. In the event of documented fiduciary concern regarding the executive management, a coalition of minority shareholders representing at least 15% of the voting stock may petition for an emergency governance review. Independent of the chairman's approval, I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, tracing the words with my finger. 15%. My father held 51%. Grant held 10%. I held 5%. A gift from when I turned 21. The remaining 34% was scattered among retired employees and early investors, people who had been given stock options in the early days instead of bonuses. If I could unite the minority shareholders, if I could get to 15%, I could trigger a review. I could force the board to look at the evidence without my father being able to block it. I closed the binder. I had my weapon. But before I could use it, I had to endure the theater. The Harbor Point Business Alliance Charity Gala was the social event of the season. It was held at the Yacht Club, a sprawling building of glass and cedar overlooking the marina. Tickets were $500 a plate. Everyone who was anyone in Oregon logistics was there. My father insisted I attend. It is a family event. He had said, we need to show a united front. I wore a black dress that I had bought in Portland, simple and severe. I pulled my hair back. I put on my armor. The ballroom was loud, smelling of expensive perfume and prime rib. A jazz band played softly in the corner. I stood by the bar, nursing a sparkling water, watching my brother work the room. Grant was in his element. He was laughing, shaking hands, clapping men on the back. He looked like a prince holding court. My father stood beside him, beaming with pride, introducing Grant to local politicians and rival CEOs. I watched them from the periphery. I saw the way the other businessmen looked at Grant, with skepticism, with guarded amusement. They knew. The industry was small. Rumors traveled faster than freight trains. They knew Hasten Freight was slow paying its bills. They knew Grant was a gambler, but they smiled and drank his wine because that was the game. Then the speeches began. My father took the stage first. He spoke about community, about legacy, about the 30 years Hasten Freight had supported the local food bank. He was charming and sincere. He believed the words he was saying. He did not know that the check he was about to present was drawn on an account that was currently overdrawn. And now, my father said, I want to invite my partner, my son, and the future of this company, Grant Hayes, to say a few words. Grant bounded onto the stage. He took the microphone with the ease of a talk show host. Thank you, Dad, he said. He looked out at the crowd, his smile blinding. It is an honor to lead this company. We are innovating. We are expanding. We are defining what logistics looks like for the next generation. He paused for effect. And I want to acknowledge my sister, Vivian, who is here tonight. Vivian came back from the city a few weeks ago. The spotlight swung through the room and landed on me. I froze. I forced a smile onto my face, but my lips felt numb. Vivian is lending a hand with some administrative projects, Grant said, his voice dripping with condescending warmth. It is great to have family talent returning to assist the leadership team. Give her a round of applause. Folks, the room clapped politely. Administrative projects. Returning to assist. He had done it again, in front of the entire business community, in front of the people I had negotiated against in my former life. He had reduced me to a secretary. He had publicly defined my role as subordinate, temporary, and small. I stood there, bathed in the spotlight, and I felt the humiliation burn through me like a fever. But beneath the humiliation, something harder was forging itself. I did not wave. I did not nod. I just stared at him, right into his eyes across the crowded room. I saw the triumph in his face. He thought he had buried me. I walked out of the ballroom while the applause was still dying down. I went to the coat check, got my trench coat, and walked out into the cool night air. I stood on the dock, listening to the water lap against the pilings. I was not going to just audit him, I was going to destroy him. The next morning, I was back in the archives. I was fueled by a cold, sleepless rage. I was looking for ammunition. I found the minute books. These were the official records of the board meetings, the legal proof of corporate decisions. I started cross-referencing the dates of the board approvals for the large consulting contracts. Approval granted. June 12th. I checked my calendar. June 12th was a Sunday. The office was closed. Approval granted. August 4th. August 4th was the day of the annual company picnic. The board members were all at the lake, drinking beer and eating hot dogs. There was no meeting. Approval granted. September 10th. September 10th. My father was in the hospital for his hip surgery. Grant hadn't just bullied the board into approving the contracts. He hadn't asked them at all. He had written the minutes himself, forged the signatures, and filed them as fact. This was procedural fabrication. It was forgery. I sat back on the concrete floor, surrounded by the lies. I had enough. I had the fake invoices. I had the fraudulent dashboards. I had the forged minutes. I needed to tell my father. I knew it was a risk. I knew he would deny it. But I still had a shred of hope that Leonard Hayes was a moral man who had simply been deceived. I owed him the chance to do the right thing. I went to his house that night. Elaine was out at her book club. It was just the two of us. We sat in his study. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. It was the room where he had taught me to play chess when I was 7. "Dad," I said, "I need you to look at something." I placed the file on his desk. The invoices, the dashboards, the minutes. Leonard looked at the folder, but he did not open it. He took a sip of his scotch. He looked tired. "I know what is in there. Vivian," he said softly. I froze. "You know? I know the numbers are creative," he said. He chose the word carefully, as if stepping around a landmine. Grant explained it to me. "It is a bridge strategy. We are leveraging short-term debt to finance the expansion. The consulting firms are necessary to guide the transition. They are shell companies." "Dad," I said, "Grant is paying himself, and the board meetings never happened." June 12th was a Sunday. Leonard waved his hand dismissively. "Details. The board would have approved it anyway. Grant is just cutting through the red tape. He is a man of action. Vivian, you get so hung up on the process that you miss the result. The result is fraud." I said, my voice was rising. "Dad, he is showing Falcon Ridge false data. If they find out, we lose everything." Leonard slammed his glass down on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Enough!" he shouted. He stood up, his face red. "I did not bring you here to destroy this family. Vivian, I brought you here to help, to support your brother. I am trying to save the company." I yelled back, "You are auditing your own blood!" He roared. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I don't see the way you look at him? You are jealous. You have always been jealous because he is the one who stayed. He is the one who is carrying the weight." He walked around the desk and pointed a finger at me. "Put that file away," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Burn it. I do not want to hear another word about invoices or bylaws. You will support him, or you will leave. Those are your choices." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had idolized my whole life. I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew. Deep down, he knew Grant was a fraud. But acknowledging it would mean admitting that his legacy was a lie. It would mean admitting that he had bet on the wrong child. He was choosing the lie. He was choosing the image of the successful Hayes family over the reality of the crime. I picked up the folder. I felt a profound, hollow sadness opening up inside me. It was the death of the father I thought I had. "Okay. Dad," I said quietly, "I understand." I walked out of the study. I did not burn the file. The next morning, I drove into the city to see Sloan Mercer. Sloan was a corporate attorney who specialized in hostile takeovers and governance disputes. She worked in a glass tower that looked down on the city like a predatory bird. She was sharp, unsentimental, and expensive. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. She read the bylaws. She looked at the evidence. "You have a case," she said. Her voice was cool and clinical. "The forged minutes alone are grounds for removal for cause. The fraud with the lenders is a criminal matter, but we can use it as leverage to force a resignation before we have to go to the authorities. Can we do it without destroying the company?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, "if we move fast, if we seize control of the board before the lenders find out. But you need the votes. Vivian, you cannot do this alone. You need that 15% to trigger the emergency meeting, and you need a majority of the board to vote for removal. I have 5%. I said. "Then you need 10 more, Sloan said, "and you need it by yesterday." I left her office with a plan. It was a hostile act. It was a declaration of war. I started making calls. I called the McKinnons first. They were a retired couple who lived in a bungalow on the north side of town. Arthur McKinnon had been my father's first warehouse manager. He had been paid in stock options in 1980. He owned 4% of the company. I went to their house for tea. We sat in their living room, surrounded by photos of their grandchildren. "How is the business?" "Vivian?" Arthur asked. He was 80 years old, his hands trembling slightly as he held his cup. "We hear rumors. People say things are unstable." I put my tea down. I looked him in the eye. I did not lie to him. The rumors are true. "Arthur, the company is in trouble. Grant is taking risks that are putting your pension in danger." Arthur looked at his wife. "Martha." She looked frightened. "What can we do?" Arthur asked. "Sell me your shares." I said, "I will pay you 10% over the current valuation. Cash. Today, but—" "Leonard," Arthur said. "He is my friend. Leonard is not in control anymore," I said gently. "Grant is, and if Grant stays in control, those shares are going to be worthless in 6 months. Let me protect your investment. Arthur, let me save what you worked for." They sold. 2 days later, I visited Sarah Jenkins, the widow of the former chief dispatcher. She owned 3%. She was living on a fixed income and was terrified of the inflation news she saw on television. I offered her a lump sum that would secure her nursing home care for the rest of her life. She sold. I moved quietly, meeting in living rooms and diners, buying up the fragments of the company one piece at a time. I used my own savings. I liquidated my retirement accounts from my job in Portland. I took out a second mortgage on my condo. I poured everything I had into the war chest. By the end of the week, I had acquired an additional 11% of the stock. I now controlled 16% of Hasten Freight Group. I had the coalition. I had the bylaws. I had the evidence. I sat in my apartment, staring at the stack of signed stock transfer certificates. I was broke. I was exhausted. I was estranged from my family. But I was ready. I picked up my phone and called Sloan. "File the petition." I said, it was done. The silence was over. The war had officially begun. The war for the soul of Hasten Freight did not begin with a shout. It began with a marketing campaign. On Monday morning, I walked into the lobby to find my brother's face staring down at me from a 6-foot banner. It was a high-resolution photograph, filtered to give him a golden, visionary glow. He was looking toward a non-existent horizon, his jaw set in determination. Beneath his chin, in bold, sans serif font, were the words, "The New Era, Unbound." Grant had launched his offensive. It was a rebranding strategy designed not just to elevate him, but to isolate me. He sent out company-wide emails 3 times a day, filled with buzzwords about agility, disruption, and the shedding of old skin. In these memos, he painted a very specific picture of the internal conflict. He cast himself as the futurist, the one willing to take the bold risks necessary to survive in a digital economy, and carefully, without ever naming me directly. He constructed a straw man to stand against him. He warned the staff about operational gatekeepers and legacy thinkers who were obsessed with spreadsheets and risk aversion. He called it fear-based management. He was telling 200 employees that I was the reason they weren't getting raises. He was telling them that my caution was the anchor dragging the ship down, while his vision was the wind that would set them free. It was smart. It turned employee uncertainty into a loyalty test. If you sided with Grant, you were part of the future. If you listened to Vivian, you were a dinosaur. I did not retaliate with posters. I did not send mass emails. I knew I could not win a popularity contest against a man who had been buying everyone drinks for 5 years. Instead, I went to the ground. I started hosting what I called process reviews. That was the corporate name. In reality, they were listening sessions. I went to the break room in the dispatch center at 5 in the morning. When the night shift was bleeding into the day shift, I brought 4 dozen donuts from the Good Bakery on 4th Street and 2 boxes of coffee. I sat at one of the scratched laminate tables and waited. At first, the dispatchers were wary. They circled the donuts like they might be baited traps. But eventually, a senior router named Benji sat down. He was a heavy man with tired eyes who had been routing trucks since before GPS was standard. "So," Benji said, blowing on his coffee, "is it true you are here to cut the pension match?" I looked him in the eye. "No, that is a lie. Grant says the operations audit is just a fancy word for layoffs." Benji said, "He says you are looking for redundancies. I am looking for waste." "Benji," I said, "I am looking for why we are paying double for fuel and why we have consulting firms invoicing us for work that never happens. I am not here to fire the people who actually do the work. I am here to make sure there is still a company left to employ you next year." Benji looked at me for a long time. He took a bite of a maple bar. "We are short 3 drivers on the northern route," he said quietly, "and the routing software keeps crashing. We have to do the manifests by hand half the time. Tell me about the software," I said. I took notes. I listened. I did this every day for a week. I went to the loading dock and listened to the forklift drivers complain about the new safety harnesses that chafed their necks. I went to the billing department and listened to the clerks complain about the invoice system that duplicated entries. I promised them nothing except the truth. I told them, "I cannot fix everything tomorrow, but I'm not going to fire you to save a nickel." Slowly, the temperature in the building began to shift. The glances in the hallway became less hostile. The whispers stopped stopping when I entered a room. I was building a constituency of the people who knew how the machine actually worked. They began to realize that while Grant was promising them the moon, I was the one trying to fix the engine so they could get home for dinner. It was during one of these deep dives into the operational clutter that I found the contract. I was reviewing the software license agreements, trying to understand why Benji's routing system was failing. I was logged into the legal shared drive. Access Owen Pike had quietly restored for me through a backdoor admin privilege. I found a folder labeled IP transfer/draft. I opened it. It was a contract draft, dated 3 weeks ago. It was an agreement to transfer the proprietary rights of our custom routing algorithm, the core logic that gave Hasten Freight its efficiency edge, to a third-party entity called Velocity Tech. The purchase price listed was $1. I froze. This algorithm had been developed in-house over 10 years. It was worth millions. It was the only thing that differentiated us from the generic carriers, and Grant was preparing to sell it for $1 to a company I had never heard of. I ran a search on Velocity Tech. The registered agent was a lawyer in Delaware, but the principal officer was listed as Dane Caro. I knew that name. Dane Caro was Grant's fraternity brother. They played golf together every Sunday. Dane had no background in logistics. He was a trust fund kid who invested in nightclubs. Grant was stripping the assets. He was moving the most valuable intellectual property out of the company and into his friend's hands, likely to license it back to us at a premium later, or to sell it off when the ship sank. It was looting, plain and simple. I printed the contract. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, predatory focus. The executive meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning. It was the first time the department heads had gathered since Grant's New Era campaign began. The conference room was sleek, glass-walled, and tense. Grant sat at the head of the table. He was wearing a charcoal suit and looked energized. Leonard sat to his right, looking like a weary emperor. I sat at the far end of the table, flanked by the VP of Sales and the HR director. Grant started the meeting with a slide deck. It was all flash, graphs that went up and to the right. Buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift. We are pivoting to a tech-first model, Grant announced, clicking to a slide that showed a stock photo of a futuristic semi-truck. We are going to lean out our physical assets and double down on digital integration. The department heads nodded, taking notes. They were afraid to ask what leaning out physical assets meant. I waited until he paused for breath. "Grant," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the room like a razor. He looked down the table at me, annoyed. "Yes. Vivian?" "Regarding this digital integration," I said, "I noticed a draft contract in the legal drive regarding the routing algorithm. Can you explain why we are preparing to transfer our core IP to a company owned by Dane Caro for $1? The silence that fell over the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. Grant's smile faltered. A flush of red crept up his neck. "That is a draft." "Vivian," he said, his voice tightening, "it is a preliminary structure for a holding company strategy. It is to protect the asset from liability." "Protect it from liability?" I asked. "By selling it to your college roommate for $1? How does losing ownership of our primary operational tool protect the company? And why was this not disclosed to the board?" Grant slammed his hand on the table. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he shouted. He stood up, pointing a finger at me. "You are obsessed with minutia. You are digging through trash cans looking for conspiracy theories because you cannot handle the fact that I'm leading this company." I remained seated. "I am asking a procedural question. Grant, why is our most valuable asset being gifted to your friend?" "You are sabotaging me," Grant yelled. He was losing control. The mask of the cool visionary was slipping, revealing the petulant child beneath. "You are trying to undermine confidence in this room. You are a cancer. Vivian, you come back here with your little notebook and your jealousy, and you try to sink the ship just so you can say you told us so." Leonard stood up. "Grant, sit down. Vivian, that is enough. It is not enough." "Dad," Grant turned to our father, his eyes wild. "She is poison. She has to go." I looked at the department heads. They were staring at Grant with a mixture of shock and realization. They saw it. They saw the instability. They saw the fear behind the bluster. I stood up. I gathered my papers. "I will wait for a written explanation regarding the IP transfer," I said. I walked out of the room. I felt Grant's eyes boring into my back. I had drawn blood. That afternoon, I was in my office when my mother appeared in the doorway. Elaine looked out of place in the industrial hallway. She was wearing a beige cashmere coat and carrying a cardboard banker's box. She looked fragile. The tension in the family was wearing on her, etching new lines around her mouth. "Vivian," she said softly. "Mom." I stood up. "What are you doing here?" "I brought you something," she said. She set the box on my desk. "I cleared out the attic yesterday. I found your old trophies, and some of the company scrapbooks from when you and Grant were little. I thought—" She hesitated, touching the edge of the box. "I thought maybe if you remembered where you came from, you might find a way to make peace with your brother." I looked at the box. It was a peace offering. It was a plea for a ceasefire. "I know you think he is doing a bad job." "Vivian," she said, "but he is family, and this business. It is just money. It is not worth losing each other over." I looked at her. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't just money. It was fraud. It was theft. It was the livelihood of 300 families. But I knew she wouldn't hear it. She couldn't hear it. "Thank you." "Mom," I said, "I will look through it." She kissed my cheek. Her skin felt dry like paper. "Please, Vivian, fix it, but fix it with love." She left. I sat alone with the box. I opened it. It smelled of cedar and dust. There were photo albums. There was a ribbon I had won in a debate competition in high school. There was a drawing Grant had made of a truck when he was 6, and at the bottom, buried under a stack of old holiday cards, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I pulled it out. The cover read, "Hayes Transport, Shareholder Registry, 1990 to 2000. I opened it. It was the old handwritten record of who owned what. I flipped through the pages, tracing the history of the company in ink. I saw the original issuance to my grandfather. I saw the transfer to my father. Then I stopped. I found an entry dated October 14th, 1998. I was 16 then. Grant was 12. It was a record of a family trust restructuring. My grandfather had transferred a block of 4,000 shares, roughly 8% of the voting stock, into a generation-skipping trust for the benefit of the grandchildren. I traced the line items. The trust was supposed to dissolve when the youngest beneficiary turned 25. That was Grant. He turned 25 8 years ago. But I looked at the closing column. Status, pending re-registration. I frowned. I pulled up the current digital cap table on my laptop. The one Grant used. The one the lawyers used. On the current table, those shares were listed as being fully absorbed into Leonard's majority block, with a portion gifted to Grant. But according to this ledger, the re-registration never happened. The shares were technically still in limbo, governed by the original trust deed. And the trustee of that original trust was not Leonard. It was a bank that no longer existed, acquired by a larger bank, and the successor trustee, by default of the original language. I flipped to the back of the ledger where the trust deed was pasted. In the event of bank dissolution, the voting rights of the trust shares shall revert to the eldest living beneficiary until formal distribution is executed. The eldest living beneficiary. Me? My heart hammered against my ribs. Grant and Leonard had been voting these shares for 8 years. They had assumed they rolled over into the family pot, but they hadn't. Legally, those shares were mine to vote until the paperwork was fixed. I did the math. I had 16% from my acquisitions. This trust block was 8%. That gave me 24%. But more importantly, it meant that every vote taken in the last 8 years where the margin was less than 8% was invalid. It meant Grant's appointment as partner, which had been ratified by a simple majority vote of the shares, was potentially voidable. Elaine had told me to remember where I came from. She had handed me the sword that would cut the knot. I called Sloan. It was 8 in the evening. I need you to file a petition. I said, corrective share recognition. I have the original ledger. The trust shares were misallocated. Vivian, Sloan said, her voice sharp with interest. If we file this, it stops the clock. They cannot hold a valid board meeting until the share count is certified. It freezes Grant out. Do it. I said, file it under seal if you can. But get it on the docket before the lender covenant test on Friday. We met at her office at midnight. We drafted the petition. We attached the scans of the ledger. We built the argument. It was airtight. It was a technicality, a clerical error from 2 decades ago. But in the world of corporate law, technicalities were lethal weapons. We filed it at 9 the next morning. At 11, my phone rang. It was my father. I had never heard him sound like this. He wasn't yelling. His voice was a low, trembling frequency of pure betrayal. Come to the house, he said. Now. I drove up the hill. The rain was coming down in sheets. I parked in the driveway and walked into the house. Leonard was standing in the foyer. He was holding the legal notice Sloan had served to the company's general counsel. You filed a suit, he said. He did not invite me in. He stood blocking the hallway. It is a petition for correction. Dad, I said, the shares were never registered. I am just fixing the record. You are stealing my company, he said. He stepped forward. I gave you everything. I paid for your education. I welcomed you back when you had nowhere else to go. And this is how you repay me? By hiring lawyers to sue your own father? I am not suing you. I said, I am stopping Grant. He is going to sell the routing software. Dad, for $1. Did you know that? I do not care about the software, Leonard shouted. I care about this family. You are destroying this family for a title. You want to be CEO so badly that you are willing to burn your brother to the ground. It is not about the title, I shouted back. The emotion finally broke through. I felt tears stinging my eyes. I don't want the damn job. Dad, I have a life. I have a career. I am doing this because he is committing fraud. He is trying to save the business, Leonard yelled. He is taking risks because he has the courage to lead. And you are just cold. You have always been cold. You care more about the rules than you care about people." The words hit me like a physical slap. Cold. I looked at him. I saw the fear beneath the anger. He was terrified. He was watching his kingdom crumble. And he couldn't blame the son he loved. So he had to blame the daughter he didn't understand. "I am not doing this for me," I said, my voice shaking. "I am doing this for Benji and Dispatch. I am doing this for the drivers. I am doing this so that when the bank comes on Friday, there is still a company standing. I am trying to save the workers from the consequences of the fraud you are letting him commit." "Get out," Leonard said. He turned his back on me. "Get out of my house." I stood there for a moment, looking at his back. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to beg him to see me. But I knew it was over. The bridge was burned. I turned and walked out into the rain. I went back to my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. I was alone. I had the shares. I had the law. I was going to win. But the victory tasted like ash. I had lost my father. I had lost my mother, who would never forgive me for this. I had become exactly what they accused me of being, the assassin in the night. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were trembling. I sat down at my laptop. I had to write a speech. The emergency board session would be granted. The judge would see the ledger. The meeting would happen within 48 hours. I would have to stand in front of the directors, in front of my father and brother, and demand Grant's removal. I opened a blank document. I typed the header, "Statement to the Board of Directors regarding executive removal." I stared at the blinking cursor. I thought about the box my mother had given me. I thought about the picture of Grant and me when we were kids, sitting on the bumper of a truck, sharing an ice cream cone. We were smiling. We were a team. I started to cry. It wasn't a loud cry. It was a silent, heaving grief that shook my shoulders. I grieved for the brother I had lost to greed. I grieved for the father who had chosen a lie over the truth. I grieved for the girl in the picture who thought her family was invincible. I wiped my face. I took a breath. I began to type, "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, we are not here today to discuss family. We are here to discuss fiduciary duty. And the difference between the two is the difference between a legacy and a crime." I wrote until the sun came up. I was ready. I was hollowed out, scraped clean of hope, but I was ready. I would choose truth, I would pay the price, and I would not look back. The judge's ruling arrived via courier on a Thursday afternoon, a single sheaf of heavy bond paper that shifted the center of gravity in the Hayes family. Forever. I was in my makeshift office, staring at a wall I had covered in sticky notes, mapping the flow of fraudulent invoices. Sloan Mercer had texted me 10 minutes earlier. "We have the order." I opened the envelope. The language was dense, filled with legalese about fiduciary obligations and trust indentures, but the conclusion was a diamond bullet. The court found that the 8% block of shares held in the Generation Skipping Trust had been improperly voted by the chairman for nearly a decade. The voting rights reverted immediately to the eldest beneficiary, me. I did the math on a legal pad, my hand trembling slightly, with my original stake, the shares I had purchased from the McKinnons and Sarah Jenkins, and now the trust block. I controlled 24% of Hazen Freight Group. It was not a majority. My father and Grant, combined, still held a technical lead if they voted in lockstep, but I had shattered their supermajority. More importantly, I had crossed the threshold required to force the board of directors to act. They could no longer dismiss me as a nuisance. They had to treat me as a power block. Sloan called me moments later. "It is done," she said. Her voice was crisp, victorious. "We have served the corporate secretary. The emergency board hearing is mandatory now. We have scheduled it for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. "Monday," I said. "That gives us 4 days. 4 days to convince the board to fire my brother." Sloan said, "We have the evidence, Vivian, but evidence is cold. People are warm. You need the votes." I looked at the list of directors pinned to my wall. There were 5 of them. Leonard Hayes, chairman, vote, Grant, Grant Hayes. Director, vote, Grant, me, director, vote, remove, Samuel Stern, a retired banker who had been golfing with my father since the 80s. Vote, likely Grant, out of loyalty, and Thomas Vale. Thomas was a wild card. He was the former CEO of a regional manufacturing firm. A man known for ethical rigidity and a distinct lack of patience for incompetence. He had joined the board 2 years ago to bring outside governance. He rarely spoke in meetings, but when he did, everyone listened. He is the swing. I said, "Get him." Sloan said, "If Thomas votes with you, Samuel might fold. If Thomas votes with Leonard, you are finished. The lenders will see a divided board, they will spook, and they will pull the credit line." I hung up. I looked at the calendar. 4 days. Grant did not take the ruling lying down. If I was fighting a war of laws, he decided to fight a war of perception. On Friday morning, the atmosphere in the warehouse shifted from cautious optimism to open hostility. I walked onto the floor to check the morning manifest, and conversation died instantly. A group of loaders near Bay 2 turned their backs to me. I walked up to Benji in the dispatch office. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "What is going on?" "Benji?" I asked. He shuffled a stack of bills of lading. "Just work." "Vivian, don't lie to me," I said. "The air is thick enough to choke on." "What did he say?" Benji sighed. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Grant held a floor meeting at 6 this morning," Benji said. "Before you got in, and he told us about your takeover bid," Benji said. "He said you are bringing in a private equity firm from Portland to strip the assets. He said your plan includes a 20% headcount reduction and the elimination of the healthcare subsidy. He said you are going to sell the trucks and outsource the fleet to independent contractors." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a lie so complete, so inverted from the truth, that it was breathtaking. I was the one trying to stop the asset stripping. I was the one trying to save the payroll. "He said he is fighting to protect us," Benji added quietly. "He said that is why the cash is tight, because he is refusing to cut benefits, and you are suing him to force his hand." I looked out the window at the warehouse floor. I saw men and women I had known my whole life looking at me like I was the executioner. Grant had weaponized their fear. He had turned my silence into a confession. "I cannot let this stand," I said. I went back to my office. I did not write a memo. Memos were corporate. Memos were what people like Grant wrote. I opened a spreadsheet. I typed out a document titled The Stabilization Plan. I listed everything. Point 1. No layoffs for operational staff for 12 months. Point 2. Immediate freeze on all executive bonuses, including my own, until vendor debts are current. Point 3. Full preservation of the current healthcare plan. Point 4. A renegotiation of the debt maturities to free up cash for overdue repairs. I printed 500 copies. I did not email them. I walked out onto the floor. I stood by the time clock. As every shift changed, as every driver came in off the road, I handed them a paper personally. "Read this," I said. "This is my signature at the bottom. This is a contract between me and you. If I win on Monday, this is what happens. If Grant wins, ask him to show you his contract." I saw the confusion in their faces. I saw them reading the bullet points, their lips moving silently. I saw a driver named Miller, the one whose daughter I had tutored in math. Look at me, then at the paper, then back at me. "He says you are going to sell the fleet," Miller said. I pointed to the paper. Point 5. Fleet ownership remains internal. I am not selling the trucks. Miller, I am selling the lies. By noon, the paper was everywhere. I saw it pinned to bulletin boards. I saw it on clipboards. Grant came down from the executive suite at 1 o'clock, saw the paper in a dispatcher's hand, and turned purple. He snatched it, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. But he was too late. The truth was out of the bottle. That night, the war moved from the warehouse floor to the digital shadows. I was at my apartment, preparing my binder for the board meeting. When my phone buzzed at 2 in the morning, it was Owen Pike. "Vivian," he whispered, He sounded like he was hiding in a closet. "Are you awake?" "I am now." I said, "What is it?" "He's trying to get in." Owen said, "Who?" "The administrator account. Someone is using the master credentials from the executive suite IP address. They are trying to access the compliance archives, specifically the folder where we stored the mirror copies of the altered dashboards and the forged minutes." Grant. He knew the meeting was Monday. He was trying to purge the evidence. "Stop him," I said instinctively. "Lock the account." "No." "Wait," Owen said. "If I lock him out, he will know we are watching. He will go to the physical server room and pull the drives. He has a key." I sat up in bed, my mind racing. Owen was right. If we blocked him, he would panic and destroy the hardware. We needed him to think he had succeeded, or at least that he had failed due to a glitch. Not a guard dog. "Let him in," I said. "What?" Owen asked, his voice squeaking. "Let him in," I repeated. "But change the target path. Can you redirect his command to a dummy folder? Let him think he is deleting the files, but have him actually deleting a folder of junk data?" Owen was silent for a moment. The click of keys came through the phone. "I can sandbox him," Owen said. "I can create a virtual instance of the drive. He will see the file names. He will hit delete. The system will confirm the deletion, but the real data will be sitting on the secluded partition, untouched." "Do it," I said. "And Owen?" "Yeah?" "Record the session. I want a video log of his screen actions. I want to be able to show the board exactly what he tried to delete 3 days before the hearing. Attempted destruction of evidence is an admission of guilt." "I got it," Owen said. I stayed on the line for 40 minutes, listening to Owen breathe, listening to the silence of the night. "He is done." Owen finally said, "He just logged off. He thinks he wiped it clean." "Secure the logs," I said. "Make 3 copies. 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 for Sloan." I hung up. I lay back in the dark, but I did not sleep. Grant believed he had just erased his crimes. He would walk into that boardroom on Monday feeling invincible, thinking I was holding an empty gun. He had no idea I had just watched him load the bullets for me. Saturday was the brunch. My mother called it a family reconciliation. I called it a trap, but I agreed to go because I needed to look Thomas Vale in the eye and say I had tried everything before I pulled the trigger. The house was quiet when I arrived. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy gray mist over the harbor. I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the silver that had belonged to my grandmother. Leonard sat at the head, Elaine sat at the foot, Grant sat on the side, looking relaxed, smug even. He probably thought his late-night deletion session had saved him. I sat opposite him. We ate in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the scrape of forks against porcelain. Finally, Leonard put down his napkin. "We cannot go into Monday like this," he said. He looked old. The fight had drained the color from his face. "The lenders are sending observers. If they see a family at war, they will call the loans. We will be bankrupt by Tuesday. Then Grant should resign." I said calmly. Grant laughed. He buttered a roll. "I am not resigning. Viv, I am the only reason we still have a business." Leonard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document. He slid it across the table. It sat between the salt and pepper shakers. "This is a standstill agreement," Leonard said. "It states that we agree to postpone any motions regarding executive leadership for 90 days. It establishes a temporary governance committee with all 3 of us to oversee the lender review." He looked at me. "It buys us time. Vivian, it shows the bank we are united. Sign it, and we can figure out the rest later." I looked at the paper. It was a surrender. 90 days was enough time for Grant to bury the rest of the bodies, to sell the routing software, to finish the job. Grant picked up a pen. He signed it with a flourish. "I am a team player," he said, looking at me. "I am willing to put the company first. Are you?" I looked at my mother. She was staring at her plate, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mom?" I asked. "Do you want me to sign this?" Elaine looked up. Her face was ravaged by grief. "Just sign it." "Vivian," she whispered, "please, Just make it stop. I looked at Leonard. He was pleading with his eyes. He wanted peace. He wanted the fantasy of the happy family back. Even if it was built on a foundation of lies, I cannot sign it, I said. Grant threw his pen down. See? I told you. She wants to burn it down. I am not burning it down. I said, I am refusing to cover up a crime. Grant deleted files last night. Dad, he tried to wipe the compliance server. Grant froze. His eyes darted to mine. That is a lie, he said. But his voice cracked. It is not a lie. I said, we have the logs. If I sign this, I am an accessory to fraud. I won't do it. Leonard slammed his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. You are stubborn, he shouted. You have always been stubborn. You think you are so righteous. Vivian, you think you are better than us. I don't think I am better, I said. I think I am honest. Elaine made a sound. It was a high, thin wail. She stood up, her chair scraping backward. I told you, she screamed. She was looking at Leonard. I told you this would happen. Elaine, Leonard said, reaching for her. No. She pulled away. She turned to me, her eyes wild. I told him to back Grant. Years ago, when you left for Portland, I told him, Grant is the one who stayed. Grant is the one who needs us. Vivian is strong. Vivian doesn't need us. The room went silent. I sat very still. The words hung in the air, vibrating. Vivian doesn't need us. So that was it. That was the core of it. It wasn't about competence. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about need. Grant was the broken bird, the one they could coddle, the one they could control. I was the one who had flown away, and for that, I was punished. They had backed Grant not because he was capable, but because he was theirs. I stood up. I felt a strange, cold clarity. You are right, Mom, I said softly. I don't need you, not like he does. But the company needs me, and the 300 people who work there need me. I looked at the document on the table. I am not signing. I will see you on Monday. I walked out. I heard my mother sobbing behind me. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away. I didn't cry. I was done crying. I had a job to do. Thomas Vale lived in a modern glass house on the edge of the cliffs. It was a house of sharp angles and clear views, much like the man himself. I arrived at 4 o'clock. I had called ahead. He met me at the door wearing a sweater and corduroys. He led me into his study. I sat down. I placed a black binder on his desk. I am not here to charm you. Thomas, I said, I am not here to promise you miracles. Thomas looked at the binder. What is this? This is the truth. I said, it contains the forensic timeline of the forged minutes. It contains the invoices for the shell companies. It contains the video log of Grant attempting to delete the evidence at 2 this morning. Thomas opened the binder. He put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the pages. He paused at the invoices. He paused at the bylaws. He read for 20 minutes. I sat in silence. I did not interrupt him. I let the evidence speak. Finally, he closed the binder. He took off his glasses and looked at me. This is damning. Vivian, he said. His voice was grave. If we act on this, if we remove him, the family will be destroyed. Leonard will never forgive you. I know. I said. Thomas studied me. He looked at my hands, which were folded in my lap. Why are you doing this? He asked. You could walk away. You have a reputation in the industry. You could go back to Portland and let this collapse. Why take the hit? Why become the villain in your own father's story? Because I know the names of the drivers. I said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. I know Miller. I said, I know Benji. I know Marisol. They have mortgages. They have kids. If Grant stays, the lenders will foreclose. And those people lose everything. My father and Grant, they will be fine. They have trusts. They have assets. But the workers? They have nothing but this job. I leaned forward. I am willing to lose my family to save the company. Thomas, that is the cost. I have accepted it. The question is, are you willing to do your duty as a director? even if it is uncomfortable? Thomas looked out the window at the gray ocean. He was a man who valued order. He was a man who believed in rules. He turned back to me. "I will read the rest of this tonight," he said. That was all he promised. But as I stood to leave, he stood up and offered me his hand. His grip was firm. "You are a lot like your grandfather," he said. I nodded. I took that as the only answer I was going to get. Monday morning dawned with a sky the color of bruised iron. I arrived at the headquarters at 8 o'clock. The parking lot was full. The tension was palpable. I walked up to the executive floor. The boardroom was prepared. There were pitchers of water. There were notepads. In the corner, sitting in chairs placed against the wall, were 3 men in gray suits, the observers from Falcon Ridge Holdings, the lenders. They did not speak. They watched. They were the vultures waiting to see if the animal was still alive. Leonard arrived at 8:30. He looked 10 years older than he had on Saturday. He did not look at me. Grant arrived at 8:45. He was wearing his lucky tie. A bright red silk. He looked manic. He was smiling too much. He clapped one of the lenders on the shoulder. The lender did not smile back. Thomas Vale arrived at 8:55. He carried the black binder under his arm. We took our seats, Leonard at the head, Grant to his right, me to his left, Thomas and Samuel Stern at the other end. The door closed. The air conditioning hummed. "I call this emergency meeting to order," Leonard said. His voice was a rasp. I looked at Grant. I looked at the lenders. I looked at the binder in front of Thomas Vale. The fuse was lit. The explosion was coming. I took a breath, steadied my hands on the mahogany table, and prepared to end it. The conference room on the executive floor was a vacuum-sealed chamber of high-gloss mahogany and tension. The air was cool, processed, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and stale fear. At the far end of the room, seated in leather chairs that creaked every time they shifted their weight, sat the 3 observers from Falcon Ridge Holdings. They were men in charcoal suits, silent, faceless, their eyes moving back and forth between the family members like spectators at a gladiator match where the losing side would be executed by foreclosure. I sat on the left side of the table. To my right sat Sloane Mercer, my counsel. She was a vision of predatory calm, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe knot, her hands resting on a stack of 3-ring binders that contained the autopsy of my brother's tenure. We had forensic timelines. We had signed affidavits from Nora in compliance, Marisol in procurement, and Owen in IT. We had the truth, bound in vinyl and ready to be entered into the record. Across from me sat Grant. He looked spectacular. He was wearing his lucky red tie, the silk shimmering under the fluorescent lights. His suit was pressed to a razor's edge. He had shaved close, his jawline sharp, his hair perfectly coiffed. He did not look like a man who had tried to delete a server at 2 a.m. He looked like a king. He was smiling at the lenders, a confident, easy grin that suggested this entire meeting was just a formality, a box to be checked before the real business of success could continue. At the head of the table sat our father, Leonard. He looked gray. The skin beneath his eyes was papery and dark. He held the gavel in a hand that trembled so slightly it was almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. He avoided my gaze. He stared at the notepad in front of him, perhaps wishing he could rewrite the last 10 years of his life. Next to Leonard sat the corporate secretary, a woman named Beverly who had been taking minutes since I was in high school. She looked terrified. Her fingers hovered over her stenography machine, and at the far end, flanking the lenders, were the independent directors, Samuel Stern and Thomas Vale. Samuel was looking at the ceiling. Thomas was looking at me. Leonard cleared his throat. It was a dry, rasping sound. "I call this emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Hasten Freight Group to order," Leonard said. "The time is 9 o'clock. He paused. "We are here pursuant to the petition filed by the Minority Shareholder Coalition regarding governance concerns." He couldn't even say my name. I was just the Minority Shareholder Coalition. "Grant," Leonard said. turning to his son with a look of desperate hope. "Why don't you walk us through the current operational status? I think if we clarify the numbers, we can resolve these misunderstandings quickly." Grant stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him flared to life. "Good morning, gentlemen," Grant said, his voice a smooth baritone. He nodded to the lenders. "Ignoring me entirely, I know there has been some noise in the system lately, some confusion regarding our accounting methodologies during this aggressive growth phase. I want to put your minds at ease." He clicked to the first slide. It showed a graph with a sharp upward trajectory. "What we are seeing here is a temporary liquidity crunch due to strategic capital deployment," Grant said. "The discrepancies in the vendor payments are merely timing differences. We have shifted our accounts payable cycle to 45 days to maximize cash on hand for the fleet modernization. The consulting fees you may have heard rumors about are actually capitalized investments in next-generation logistics software." He was good. I had to give him that. He spoke with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. He used words like synergy and optimization as shields. He was painting a picture of a company that wasn't bleeding to death, but simply catching its breath before a marathon. He clicked to the next slide. "As for the governance issues," Grant continued, with a dismissive wave of his hand, "we are streamlining our board approval process to move at the speed of the market. Sometimes, paperwork lags behind action. That is not fraud. That is agility," he smiled. It was the smile that had charmed investors, customers, and our parents for 30 years. I watched Thomas Vale. He was reading along in the black binder I had given him on Saturday. He did not look up at the screen. He turned a page. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "Grant," Thomas said. Without looking up, Grant paused. "Yes, Thomas?" Thomas pointed a finger at a line in the binder. "You mentioned timing differences." Thomas said, "Can you explain why the timing difference for the tire supplier involved a 20% price increase that was then rebated to a separate account controlled by North Star Solutions?" Grant's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "North Star is a strategic partner," Grant said. "They handle our procurement negotiation. The rebate is their fee." Thomas looked up. He took off his reading glasses. "And who owns North Star Solutions?" Thomas asked. Grant shifted his weight. "It is a blind trust. It is standard industry practice to anonymize. It is not a blind trust." I said, my voice cut through the air like a knife. I did not stand up. I remained seated, my hands folded on the table. Sloan slid a document toward the center of the table. "This is the incorporation document for North Star Solutions." I said, "It lists the registered agent as the same personal attorney who handles your estate planning." Grant, "And the beneficiary of the account is listed as a holding company registered in Nevada, of which you are the sole signatory." Grant turned to me. His eyes were cold. "You are out of order." "Vivian," he snapped, "this is an operational presentation. I am a director of this company," I said calmly, "and I am speaking to a fiduciary risk. You are paying yourself a kickback on our own tire contracts. That is not a timing difference. That is embezzlement." Leonard slammed the gavel down. "Vivian," he shouted, "we are not here to throw accusations. We are here to review the numbers." "I am reviewing the numbers." "Dad," I said. I turned to the lenders. "Gentlemen, if you look at tab 3 of the binder provided by Miss Mercer, you will find a forensic analysis of the board minutes for the last 18 months. I watched the lenders open the binders. They turned to tab 3 simultaneously. You will notice," I continued, "that on June 12th, August 4th, and September 10th, the minutes record unanimous board approval for contracts totaling $2 million to North Star Solutions and Apex Advisory." I paused. June 12th was a Sunday. I said, August 4th was the company picnic, and on September 10th, the chairman was under anesthesia for hip surgery. I looked at Leonard. "Did you vote from the recovery room, Dad? Or were you unaware that a meeting was even taking place?" Leonard's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the lenders. He saw the way they were looking at him, not with sympathy, but with calculation. They were assessing the liability. They were realizing the chairman was a figurehead, "These are clerical errors," Grant shouted. He was losing his composure. The red flush was creeping up his neck. Beverly probably got the dates wrong when she transcribed the notes from the audio files. "You are trying to hang me on typos." Beverly, the secretary, looked up, offended. "I never get dates wrong. Mr. Hayes," and there were no audio files. "You gave me the minutes already typed and asked me to sign them." The room went dead silent. Grant turned to look at Beverly like he wanted to strangle her. "Procedural fabrication," Sloan said. Her voice was cool, legalistic, under the corporate bylaws, and under state law. Falsifying corporate records is a felony. It also immediately voids the indemnification clause in your employment contract. Grant slammed his hand on the table. "This is a witch hunt!" he yelled. He pointed at me. "She has been planning this since she got here. She is jealous because I am the one running the company. She is trying to stage a coup." I stood up then. I picked up the final piece of evidence. The USB drive Owen had given me. "This is not a coup." "Grant," I said, "this is a cleanup." I looked at the board. On Saturday morning, at 2 a.m., an attempt was made to access the Secure Compliance Archive and delete the files related to these minutes and the Velocity Tech contract draft. I said. Grant went pale. He stared at the drive in my hand. The attempt was made using the executive master credentials. I continued. The IP address traces directly to the desktop computer in the CEO's suite. We have the keystroke logs. We have the video capture of the screen. I placed the drive on the table. It made a small plastic click. Attempted destruction of evidence during an active legal review is not a typo. I said, it is an admission of guilt, and it places this entire company in default of our lender covenants. I looked directly at the lenders. If we do not act today to remove the source of this fraud, I said, these gentlemen will call the loans by close of business, and Hasten Freight will cease to exist. Leonard stood up. He looked frantic. He looked from me to Grant to the lenders. Please, he said. His voice was shaking. Let's take a recess. This is a family misunderstanding. We can fix this internally. Grant made some mistakes. Yes, he was overzealous. But we can put controls in place. We don't need to do this. We don't need to air this laundry. He looked at Thomas Vale. Thomas, you know us. You know this family. This is just a sibling dispute that got out of hand. Thomas Vale closed his binder. He took off his glasses and placed them neatly on the table. He looked at Leonard with a gaze that was filled with pity, but entirely void of mercy. Leonard, Thomas said quietly, this is not a dining room. This is a boardroom, and these are not domestic matters. Thomas placed his hand on the binder. Forgery is not a family misunderstanding, Thomas said. Embezzlement is not a sibling dispute. These are corporate crimes, and as directors, we have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, all of them, and to the employees to stop it. He looked at Grant. If we allow this to continue, Thomas said, we are personally liable. I am not willing to go to prison for your son. Leonard. He turned to Beverly. I move to vote on the motion to remove Grant Hayes from all executive functions effective immediately. For cause, citing breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. The room seemed to tilt. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Samuel Stern, the loyalist, the man who had golfed with my father for 30 years, looked at the lenders. He saw the grim set of their jaws. He realized the ship was sinking. I second the motion, Samuel whispered. He wouldn't look at Leonard. Grant made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You are kidding me, he said. Samuel, you are kidding me. It has been moved and seconded, Thomas said. All in favor of the motion? I raised my hand. Thomas raised his hand. Samuel raised his hand. 3 votes, a majority. Grant stared at the hands. He looked like a man watching his own execution. He turned to Leonard. Dad? He said. Leonard sat frozen. He was the chairman. He could vote against it, but it wouldn't matter. The math was done. 3 against 2. Leonard did not raise his hand. He did not lower it. He simply sat there, staring at the polished wood, shrinking into his suit. Grant turned to me. The shock on his face shattered. replaced by a pure, molten hatred. "You did this," he hissed. He leaned across the table. "You did this because you are miserable." He spat. "You did this because no one chose you. Dad didn't choose you. Mom didn't choose you. You walked away, and you hated that we were happy without you. So you came back to burn it down." The words hit me in the center of my chest. No one chose you. It was the truth. It was the thing I had carried with me since I was a little girl. Watching my father hoist Grant onto his shoulders while I walked behind them carrying the bags, it was the echo of my mother's voice at the brunch table. "Grant is the one who stayed." For a second, I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes. I felt the urge to scream, to defend myself, to list the sacrifices I had made, the money I had spent, the sleepless nights I had endured to save this ungrateful, rotting kingdom. I wanted to be the daughter, just for a moment, and not the executioner. But I looked past Grant. I saw the door, and in my mind, I saw the faces of the people standing in the hallway downstairs. I saw Miller. I saw Benji. I saw the 300 people who were waiting to see if they still had a future. They had chosen me. They had read my plan. They had believed me. I took a deep breath. I pushed the pain down into a small, hard box in my stomach. I locked it. "The motion passes," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a CEO. "Grant is terminated for cause. Effective immediately." Sloane cleared her throat. "We need a second motion," she said, "to appoint an interim chief executive officer to manage the transition and negotiate with the lenders." Thomas Vale nodded. "I move to appoint Vivian Hayes as interim CEO, subject to the oversight of a newly formed governance committee," Thomas said. "Second," Samuel said quickly. "All in favor?" Thomas asked. I raised my hand. Thomas raised his. Samuel raised his. "Opposed?" Grant stood up. He shoved his chair back so hard it tipped over and crashed onto the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Go to hell," Grant said. He looked at me. "Go to hell. Vivian." He turned and walked out of the room. He didn't look back. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, the vibration rattling the water pitchers. Silence returned to the room. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped. Leonard stood up. He moved slowly, like a man moving through deep water. He reached into his pocket and took out his glasses. He placed them on the table. Then he took off his gold watch, the one with the company logo on the face, and placed it next to the glasses. "I resign," he said softly. "Dad," I said, "you don't have to." "I resign as chairman," he said. He spoke to the air. "Not to me. I will not preside over a board that destroys my son." He turned to the door. He walked past me. He walked past Thomas. He walked past the lenders. I stood up. "Dad." He stopped at the door. He paused for a long moment, his hand on the brass handle. I thought he might turn around. I thought he might look at me, might see that I had saved his legacy, even if I had broken his heart. But he didn't turn. He opened the door and walked out. I looked at the corner of the room. Elaine was standing there. She had come in quietly during the vote, standing in the shadows by the credenza. She was clutching her purse with both hands. She looked at the empty chair where Grant had sat. Then she looked at the empty chair where Leonard had sat. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of horror and confusion. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a monster who had worn her daughter's face. "Mom," I whispered. She shook her head, a tiny, jerky motion. She couldn't speak. She turned and followed Leonard out the door. I was alone. Well, not alone. The lawyers were there. The directors were there. The lenders were there. But the family was gone. The Hayes family was dead. Only the Hayes Freight Group remained. One of the lenders, the lead observer from Falcon Ridge, stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked over to me. "Ms. Hayes," he said. He did not smile, but his voice was respectful. "Yes?" I said. "We will need to see a revised cash flow projection by Friday," he said, "and we will need to audit the North Star accounts. But based on the action taken today, we are willing to extend the covenant waiver for 30 days. "Thank you," I said. Keep the doors open, he said. He left. The others followed. Thomas Vale walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. Vivian, he said. I know. I said, it didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like amputation. It felt like I had cut off my own arm to save the body. I packed up my binders. I took the USB drive. I thanked Sloan. I walked out of the boardroom and down the long hallway to the elevator. I rode it down to the ground floor. When the doors opened, I expected noise. I expected chaos. But the lobby was quiet. There were people there, dozens of them, employees from the admin offices, drivers who had come in off the road, warehouse supervisors. They were standing in clusters, leaning against the walls, sitting on the reception sofas. They saw me walk out of the elevator. The conversation stopped. No one cheered. No one clapped. This wasn't a movie. They knew what had just happened. They knew the chairman had resigned. They knew the visionary had been fired. They knew the company was wounded, bleeding, and fragile. They looked at me with a mixture of relief and fear. They were relieved that the lies were over. They were terrified of what came next. I walked through the crowd. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I stopped in the center of the lobby. I saw Benji. I saw Nora. I saw Owen. Owen gave me a small, shaky nod. I took a deep breath. We are still open. I said, my voice carried in the quiet space. The bank is staying. I said, the payroll is safe. We have a lot of work to do, but we are going to do it with the truth. There was a collective exhale. Shoulders dropped. A few people nodded. Back to work, I said. I walked toward the front doors, needing fresh air. I stepped out into the parking lot. The rain had started again, a light, cold drizzle. I looked up at the banner Grant had hung. The new era, unbound. It was already sagging, one corner peeling away from the brick. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I had won. I owned the company. I was the CEO. I looked at my phone. No missed calls. No texts from my mother. No angry voicemails from my father. Just silence. I started the engine. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, clearing the view for a second, then letting the rain obscure it again. Clear, obscure, clear, obscure. I put the car in gear. I had a meeting with the operations team in an hour. I had to save the ship. I drove out of the lot, leaving the ghosts behind me. Victory did not taste like champagne. It tasted like cold coffee, dry erase marker fumes, and anxiety. The morning after the board meeting, I walked into the CEO's office. I had not moved into it yet. It still smelled like Grant, a cloying mix of expensive cologne and the ozone scent of high-end electronics. His putter was still leaning against the bookshelf. His framed diploma, the one he had barely earned, was still on the wall. I did not sit in his chair. I sat at the small conference table in the corner, surrounded by stacks of binders. The coup was over. The war for survival had just begun. My first act as interim chief executive was not a speech. It was a massacre of the ego. I had to call every major creditor we had and apologize. I had to sit on conference calls with risk officers from Chicago and New York, men who viewed Hazen Freight Group not as a legacy, but as a distressed asset, and beg for time. Please, I said, over and over again. The leadership issue has been resolved. The fraud has been excised. The underlying business is sound. Give us 90 days. I spent 12 hours a day on the phone. My voice grew hoarse. I stopped eating lunch. I lived on adrenaline and the terrifying realization that my brother had not just cooked the books. He had burned the kitchen. The cash position was worse than I thought. Grant had been moving money between accounts so fast that the liquidity looked real. But it was a mirage. We had 3 days of operating cash on hand. 3 days. If a single major client delayed payment, we would miss payroll. I called Marisol in procurement. Marisol, I said, I need you to stretch the payables. Call the tire guys. Call the fuel syndicate. Tell them we will pay them, but we need net 60 terms just for this month. They are going to scream. Vivian, Marisol said, they are already mad about the North Star rebates. Let them scream. I said, just don't let them cut us off. Tell them the new CEO is auditing the books and the check is in the mail. Lie if you have to. Just buy me a week. I felt the weight of it then. The compromise. I had removed Grant because he was a liar. And here I was, 3 days in, telling my staff to stretch the truth to keep the lights on. The difference, I told myself, was that I wasn't stealing. I was surviving. The second week was dedicated to the internal wounds. The building was traumatized. You could feel it in the hallways. People walked with their heads down. The laughter that used to echo in the break room was gone. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. They expected me to be the hatchet man. They expected the layoffs Grant had threatened. I organized what I called transparency forums, every Tuesday and Thursday, at 7 in the morning and 7 at night to catch both shifts. I stood in the cafeteria. I didn't use a podium. I didn't use slides. I just stood there with a microphone and a whiteboard. Ask me anything, I said. The first session was dead silent. 50 men and women stared at me, holding their styrofoam cups, afraid to speak. Finally, a forklift driver named Davin raised his hand. Is it true the company is for sale? He asked. No, I said. I wrote not for sale on the whiteboard in big black letters. We are in a cash crunch. I won't lie to you about that. The previous administration spent money we didn't have, but we are not selling. We are fixing. Are we losing our benefits? A woman from billing asked. No, I said. Healthcare stays. The 401k match is paused for 6 months, but I will back pay it when we are profitable again. That is a promise. I saw the skepticism in their eyes. Promises from Hayes family members had lost their currency. I also want to address the elephant in the room. I said, I looked at Owen Pike, who was standing in the back. I looked at Nora Bell. There will be no retaliation for anyone who spoke up during the investigation. I said, in fact, I am instituting a formal whistleblower policy today. If you see something wrong, and you report it, you are protected. You have my word, and you have it in writing. I handed out the policy. I saw Nora take one. Her hands were shaking. She gave me a small, watery smile. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a slow thaw. But as I peeled back the layers of the business, I realized the rot went deeper than just finances. The talent was exhausted, my best dispatcher. Benji came to me on Friday of the second week. I can't do it. Vivian, he said. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. The software is still broken. The drivers are yelling at me because the routes are inefficient. I am doing the work of 3 people. I love this place, but I am burnt out. I looked at him. I couldn't afford to lose him. If Benji left, the dispatch floor would collapse. Give me 2 weeks. Benji, I said, I can't fix the software overnight, but I can get you help. I will come down there. I will work the desk with you. You? He asked. The CEO? I used to run dispatch when I was 22. I said, I still remember the codes. Just give me 2 weeks. He agreed, barely. Then came the letter. It arrived via certified mail on a rainy Tuesday. It was on heavy cream-colored stationery from a law firm in Seattle known for aggressive litigation. Wrongful termination and defamation of character. Grant was suing. The letter was a masterpiece of alternative reality. It claimed that the board meeting had been illegal, that the evidence had been manufactured, and that my hostile takeover had caused him irreparable reputational harm. He was demanding reinstatement, back pay, and $10 million in damages. I sat in my office, reading the letter, feeling a cold rage simmer in my gut. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was doubling down. I called Sloan Mercer. He is bluffing, Sloan said. Her voice was calm. He knows we have the server logs. He knows we have the forged minutes. If he takes this to court, he goes to prison. This is a shakedown. Vivian, he wants a settlement. He wants you to pay him to go away. I don't have the money to pay him. I said, and even if I did, I wouldn't give him a dime. He stole from us. Then we ignore it? I asked. No, Sloan said. We answer. But we don't answer with a check. We answer with a cannon. We drafted the response that afternoon. It was 1 page. It simply stated that if the lawsuit was filed, Hasten Freight Group would immediately release the full forensic audit to the public record, including the video logs of his attempted data destruction, and would file a countersuit for criminal fraud and embezzlement. It was the nuclear option. It was a threat to destroy his life completely if he didn't back down. "Send it," I said. I signed the letter. My hand didn't shake. I was learning that leadership meant making decisions that made you want to vomit, and then eating a sandwich and going back to work. But the hardest meeting wasn't with lawyers. It was with my father. Leonard had gone radio silent since the resignation. He hadn't called. He hadn't come to the office. He had vanished into the big house on the hill. 3 weeks after the vote, he agreed to meet me. Not at the house. He said he wasn't ready to have me in the house, but at a small cafe at the marina. It was a neutral ground, a place where we used to get hot chocolate on Sunday mornings. I arrived first. I ordered a black coffee. The cafe was empty, the rain battering the windows. Leonard walked in. He looked smaller. The commanding presence that had filled the warehouse for 40 years was gone. He walked with a stoop. He was wearing a windbreaker, not a suit. He sat down across from me. He didn't order anything. "Hello? Dad?" I said. He looked out the window at the gray water. The boats were bobbing in their slips, the rigging clanking against the masts. "I hear you are negotiating with the lenders," he said. His voice was flat. "Yes," I said. "Falcon Ridge is giving us breathing room. We are going to make it. Dad, the company is going to survive." He turned to look at me. His eyes were cold, filled with a profound disappointment that hurt more than anger. "The company," he said. "That is all you care about. The numbers, the contracts. I care about the people." "Dad," I said, "I care about the fact that 300 families still have a paycheck." "You destroyed your brother," Leonard said. "I didn't destroy him." I said, "He destroyed himself. He broke the law. He lied to you. He was trying." Leonard slammed his hand on the table. "He was trying to prove himself. And you couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand that he was the one in the chair. You had to come back and humiliate him. He stole money." "Dad," I whispered furiously. "He was funneling cash to his friends. How can you defend that?" "Because he is family," Leonard hissed. "You don't audit family. Vivian, you protect them. You fix it quietly. You don't drag your brother in front of strangers and cut his throat." I looked at him. I realized then that we were speaking different languages. To Leonard Hayes, loyalty was the only virtue. It trumped law. It trumped ethics. It trumped truth. He would rather have run the company into the ground than admit his son was a failure. "You won the company." "Vivian," Leonard said. He stood up. "You got the title. You got the power. But you lost your brother. And you lost me." He buttoned his jacket. I hope it was worth it. He walked out. I sat there for a long time. My coffee went cold. I watched the rain streak the glass. I wanted to run after him. I wanted to grab his arm and make him understand. I wanted to say, "I did this for you. I did this to save your name." But I knew it wouldn't matter. To him, I was the traitor. I stood up. I left a $5 bill on the table. I didn't lose myself. I whispered to the empty chair. I walked back to my car. I drove back to the office. I had a budget meeting at 2 o'clock. I didn't have time to grieve. When I got back to the executive suite, there was an envelope on my desk. It was plain white, no return address. It had been placed right in the center of the blotter. I opened it. Inside was a single index card. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. It wasn't my father's block print. It was softer. "I never thought you'd be the one to protect them, but you are. Keep going." There was no signature. I stared at the card. My mother, Elaine, she hadn't spoken to me since the board meeting. She was trapped in that house with Leonard's anger and Grant's martyrdom. She couldn't call me. She couldn't take my side publicly. But she had seen. She had seen the way I stood up for the workers. She had seen the truth in the ledger she had given me. "I never thought you'd be the one." It was a small, fragile olive branch. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was recognition. I tucked the card into my top drawer. Next to the stapler, it was enough. The next day, I tried to end the war. I couldn't fix my relationship with Leonard, but I thought maybe, just maybe, I could give Grant a way out that didn't involve a courtroom. I drafted a settlement offer. It was generous. Considering what he had done, I offered to drop the potential counterclaims for fraud. I offered to let him keep his 10% equity stake. Though it would be non-voting shares, I offered a joint press release that cited creative differences as the reason for his departure, allowing him to save face in the industry. The only condition was that he could never hold an executive role at Hazen Freight again. I sent it to his lawyer. I waited. 1 day, 2 days, a week. There was no response. He was refusing the olive branch. He was choosing the silence of the grudge. He would rather be a victim than a partner. He would rather hold on to his hate than accept a peace that required humility. So be it, I thought. I closed the file. The door was shut. The culmination of those first brutal months was the annual staff assembly. Usually, this was a festive event held in the warehouse. There would be balloons, loud music, and a speech from Leonard about how we were all a big family. This year, there were no balloons. I stood on a pallet stage in Bay 4, the same place where Grant had announced his partnership months ago. The same faces were looking up at me. But the mood was different. It wasn't celebratory. It was attentive. I held a microphone. I wore a gray blazer and jeans. I didn't want to look like an executive. I wanted to look like one of them. I'm not going to give you a motivational speech. I said. The sound system crackled slightly. We have had enough speeches. I picked up a remote. A screen behind me lit up. This is our balance sheet, I said. There was a murmur in the crowd. No one had ever shown the drivers the actual numbers before. Here is what we owe, I said, pointing to the red column. Here is what we made last month. Pointing to the black. We are still in the hole. I won't lie to you. The climb out is going to be steep. It is going to take a year of hard work, tight budgets, and 0 mistakes. I looked out at them. I saw Benji. I saw Davin. I saw Miller. I cannot promise you bonuses this year. I said, I cannot promise you a holiday party. I paused. But I can promise you this. Every number you see up here is real. Every decision I make will be explained to you. If I screw up, I will tell you. If we have a good month, I will show you. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. We are not a family, I said. Families keep secrets. Families protect each other even when they are wrong. We are a team, I said. Teams rely on performance. Teams rely on trust. Teams tell the truth. I looked around the room. I am asking you to be on my team. Not because I am a Hayes, but because I am the one who is going to make sure this company is still here when your kids grow up. I dropped the mic to my side. For a second, there was silence. Then, slowly, the applause started. It wasn't the polite, terrified applause of the town hall. It was solid. It was heavy. It was the sound of people who finally felt like they were standing on firm ground. It was the sound of respect. 6 months later, the emergency board meeting was convened again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The panic was gone. We met in the same conference room. Thomas Vale sat at the end of the table. Samuel Stern was there, and 2 new independent directors I had recruited, experts in logistics and forensic accounting. The lenders were gone. We had satisfied the covenant test 3 months in a row. The bank was happy. Thomas Vale opened the meeting. We have reviewed the 6-month performance metrics. Thomas said, debt reduction is ahead of schedule. Operational efficiency is up 18%. Employee retention has stabilized. He looked at me. Vivian, you have done an exceptional job as interim CEO. Thank you. Thomas, I said, I move that we remove the interim title. Thomas said, I move that we appoint Vivian Hayes as the permanent Chief Executive Officer of Hazen Freight Group. Second, Samuel said, all in favor? Every hand went up. It was done. I was the CEO, not the substitute, not the placeholder. The CEO. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was validation. It was the final proof that I hadn't destroyed the company. I had saved it. Thank you. I said, I won't let you down. The meeting adjourned. The directors shook my hand. I walked back to my office. The real office now. I had finally redecorated. The golf putter was gone. The walls were painted a soft slate blue. My own diploma was on the wall. I sat down at my desk. I looked at the view of the harbor. The sun was breaking through the clouds. I took a deep breath. I allowed myself, for the first time in a year, to feel happy. Then my computer pinged. It was a notification from the investor relations portal. A new inquiry had come in through the secure server. I frowned. We weren't soliciting investors. I opened the message. Subject: Notice of interest/equity acquisition. From Iron Creek Capital. To the Board of Directors of Hasten Freight Group. Please be advised that Iron Creek Capital has acquired a 12% equity position in the company via private transaction from secondary market holders. We request a meeting to discuss strategic direction and board representation. I froze. 12%. That was a massive block. Who had sold? I scrolled down to the bottom of the message. I looked at the signature block for Iron Creek Capital. Managing partner, Dane Caro, Grant's best friend. The man Grant had tried to sell the routing software to for $1. My stomach dropped. Grant hadn't given up. He had just changed tactics. He had used his settlement silence to build a war chest. He had found a backer, likely Dane's family money, and he was coming for me from the outside. He was buying his way back in. I stared at the screen. The happiness vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of the battlefield. The war wasn't over. The enemy had just breached the outer wall. I picked up the phone. I dialed Sloane. "Don't celebrate yet," I said when she answered. "Why? What happened?" Sloane asked. "He is back," I said, staring at the name on the screen, "and he brought an army." I hung up the phone. I looked at the unsigned note from my mother still taped to my monitor. "Keep going." I cracked my knuckles. I opened a new file. Let them come. I thought, I am not the interim anymore. Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of The CEO's Revenge. This story of Vivian Hayes and her battle for truth against her own family has been a journey, and I hope you felt every twist and turn of the corporate warfare. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Vivian's victory and want more stories about justice, betrayal, and the complex drama of family empires, please make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel. Don't forget to hit the like button if you think Vivian made the right choice. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Do you think Grant will succeed in his new attack? Or is Vivian ready for him? I read every comment and I can't wait to hear your take. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your ledgers clean. Goodbye.